Hello everyone, this video is basically going to be partially a tutorial and partially the results of all the experimenting I did with all the cheap tips and tricks I've learned for track clicking. Whether you're trying to learn it for the very first time or you've already track clicked but are struggling with consistency, I hope you'll find something useful here. The goal of this video isn't to turn anyone into a track clicking demon like Duke, Loki, or Hacks. It's just a collection of things I've learned over time that should make the learning process a bit easier and save you a lot of trial and error and be more consistent over long sessions of speedrunning without opting for high-end mice like Endgame or Turtle Beach, etc. I also want to be transparent about the fact that I'm not claiming to be an expert. Almost everything that I'll be sharing comes from hours of testing and reading discussions on Java code, Hypixel forums, bridging forums, and watching videos from other creators. And whenever I mention a specific tip or trick that comes from someone else, I'll link the original source in the description so they get the credit they deserve. If I come across any other useful resources after uploading this video, I'll add them to the description for a while, but eventually I'll stop updating it because I've reached a point where I myself can drag click comfortably for what I need, and I don't expect to revisit this guide very often. One more thing before we start, this video is mainly aimed at Minecraft speedrunning and not the bridging community at large. Bridging as a whole is its own rabbit hole, and the people who specialize in it push track clicking to an entirely different level, and that's, frankly speaking, outside my area of expertise. So I'll be focusing on the techniques that are actually useful in speedrunning. I also want to make this because a friend that I've been talking with for past couple of months suggested putting all this information into one place, especially for the Indian MCSR community. So if you're watching this, thanks for the idea, Fantom. Now, the very first thing that you should do is figure out whether your mouse is even capable of track clicking. And the easiest way to test this is by opening any CPS testing website and butterfly clicking. If you don't know what butterfly clicking is, it's pretty simple. You just alternate between two fingers on the same mouse button as fast as you can. It doesn't really require any special technique. The faster you tap, the more clicks you'll register. And this test is important because if your mouse can't register high CPS while butterfly clicking, it almost certainly won't be able to track click either. I learned this the hard way because recently I got myself a mouse from MCHOS. It was MCHOS G3V2, and it's one of those Chinese brands that effectively just copy the Logitech G Pro series. Now, before buying it, I read several threads on Reddit and whatnot, and plenty of individuals claimed that it could track click. But unfortunately, once I actually got the mouse myself, it would not register more than 7 or 8 CPS at max. I spent a lot of time tweaking everything in the software and it wasn't very good to begin with. But yeah, despite all my attempts, nothing helped whatsoever. And then about a week later, a friend of mine bought a Cosmic Byte mouse and I tested that as well, and it had the exact same problem. So the point is, before you spend hours trying, different tapes, techniques, and following tutorials, make sure that your mouse can actually register the clicks that you're trying to produce. If it passes the butterfly clicking test, then you're in good shape. If it doesn't, then unfortunately there's nothing much you can do besides getting a new mouse, of course. Now, not being able to drag click does not mean that you're a bad player. It is an advantage for sure, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because stuff like board clutching, staircasing, and just like block placement in general, it becomes so effortless. Clutching becomes so damn effortless. But with that said, it's far from a requirement because some of the best players in Minecraft, like Feinberg and Infume, they don't drag click whatsoever, and they're still one of the best out there. Now, drag clicking isn't some magic skill that's suddenly going to make you a better speedrunner. It's simply another tool that makes certain mechanics, certain movements, certain motions a lot more convenient and comfortable, and you become a lot more consistent at them once you get used to it. So before worrying about anything else, please make sure that your mouse is actually capable of drag clicking, and everything else in this video builds upon that. So now that you've confirmed your mouse is actually capable of track clicking, let's talk about the things that affect the track clicking before we get into any of the modifications or tricks. Most of what I'm about to say comes from testing my own mice and a few of my friends' mice, as I've already mentioned, over the last couple of weeks. And I don't have a massive sample size, so please don't treat this as a scientific fact. These are simply the patterns and observations that I've consistently noted throughout my testing. The first thing is your mouse's texture. Now, believe it or not, the texture of your mouse button makes a noticeable difference. I'll use my HyperX mouse and a G304 as an example. At first glance, the buttons on the HyperX feel fairly smooth, but if I run my fingers across them, I'll notice that they are actually covered in tiny bit of imperfections, and they are even more noticeable if I run my nails on them. Now, they aren't perfectly polished, and that's actually a good thing because those tiny imperfections give your fingers something to grip onto while you're drag clicking. This extra friction makes it much easier to produce consistent clicks. Now, compare that to something like the Logitech G304, which was my previous mouse. The plastic on the button is much smoother and has a more premium finish. It's great from a build quality standpoint, but that smoother surface also makes it noticeably harder to drag click because your fingers have less texture to grip onto. This doesn't mean a smooth mouse is bad, because plenty of people drag click on them just fine. It simply means you'll probably need to rely more on tape or other modifications to create that bit of grip that the mouse's texture does not naturally provide. So if I have to put it on a spectrum, I'd say that G304 and those premium finish mice are on one end, and something like the HyperX mice with a little more rough texture are on the other end, which provide a naturally, a higher bit of grip. Again, it's not the biggest factor in the world, but it's definitely something worth keeping in mind.
So this is like one of those super generic mice you'll find in like offices and whatnot, and I can't say if it can drag click and whatnot, but this is a great example of my point about texture. You see, you can obviously see this area which is like so shiny and smooth, right? It shows active variant here. That's me. Hi. Right. So yeah, like see the difference in texture, like, and then this. See, and this is what matters, because if I try to drag here, I can't. Like, it's pretty difficult. I can do it, but it's difficult. But then look at this side where my finger naturally just glides. I can't do that here. Like, I can, but it's difficult. So that's like, this is a great example of like how texture affects. And I have a feeling that because of the shit quality of these mice, the buttons are mechanical, and I can actually maybe drag click on this, but I don't have a way to confirm it. I'll maybe get an OTG and connect it to my phone and check it out on Monday. But this is great. Like, okay, I can kind of do it, but it's significantly easier on this more textured surface than on this smoother one.
The second thing, and probably one of the most misunderstood parts of drag clicking, is sweat. Most people already know that sweaty fingers make drag clicking harder. That's why you'll see so many DIY grip tapes and just commercially available, grip tapes like Pulsar grips advertising sweat resistance and moisture absorption and whatnot. But after a good bit of testing, I've come to the conclusion that sweat itself isn't the problem, it's the quantity of sweat that is the problem. Now, too much sweat is obviously bad. Your fingers become slippery. The sweat acts as a lubricant between your skin and the mouse button, and instead of gripping the surface, your fingers simply glide over it. That part is pretty obvious. But what surprised me throughout my testing was discovering that having fingers that are too dry can also be just as bad. If your fingers are completely dry, they don't generate enough friction to properly catch onto the surface of the mouse. Even if a mouse has a rough texture, your fingers can still slide instead of vibrating across the button. And that vibrating motion is the one you need for drag clicking. Your fingerprints are already covered in ridges and grooves that naturally grip onto different surfaces, and a small amount of moisture actually helps those ridges make better contact with the mouse or any other surface you're trying to hold. Without that contact, your fingers end up slipping just as easily as if they were soaking wet. So instead of thinking about sweat as something that's always bad, it's better to think of it as existing on a spectrum where too much of it is bad and too little of it is also bad. Somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot where drag clicking feels pretty much effortless. But unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly where the sweet spot is because it's different for everyone. It's something you'll have to figure out by experimenting with your own mouse and your own situation and environment. Personally, I have a simple way of checking. I'll just rub my thumb against my index and middle fingers, the two that rest on the mouse button, and pay attention to how much grip I feel. If my fingers slide around too easily, they're probably too sweaty, and if they feel overly dry and don't grip each other very well, they are probably too dry. Another trick is to lightly drag your finger across the desk. If your finger produces that slight vibrating sensation instead of gliding smoothly, you're usually pretty close to the ideal amount of moisture for that drag clicking. As for managing sweat, please keep it simple. There's no need to complicate it with, hairsprays or like, finger creams and whatnot, as I've seen in multiple tutorials and, forums and posts. The thing is, if your hands are getting too sweaty, wipe them down with a microfiber cloth or just any clean cloth in general, and wash your hands, but please don't overdo it, because constantly washing your hands can dry out your skin and eventually cause irritation and peeling, which obviously isn't great if you're going to play for long hours. On the other hand, if your fingers are too dry, please don't immediately reach out for water, because just clicking around for a minute or two naturally builds enough warmth and moisture to get your fingers into that ideal range. In my experience, it is much easier to build that little bit of grip from incredibly dry fingers than it is to remove too much sweat from your fingers once your hands start becoming slippery. So before you start blaming your mouse or buying new accessories, do pay attention to your hands, because this is the biggest factor by and large, apart from the tape that you use, obviously, that contributes to your ability to track click and how effortlessly you can do it. Sometimes the difference between getting 5 CPS and 20 CPS is simply having the right amount of grip on your fingers. Now that we've talked about the factors that affect track clicking, let's move on to the first actual trick. This is also the simplest one, and for a lot of people, it'll be all that they'll ever need. There are essentially two ways of applying tape that I would recommend. The first method is incredibly straightforward. It takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes top and requires pretty much zero effort, and it works surprisingly well. All you need is a roll of electrical tape. I'm using steel grip tape, but a lot of speedrunners use duck brand tape. However, it is incredibly expensive here in India. It retails for around 1000 rupees on Amazon, and for budget ballers like me, it just simply isn't worth it. So, steel grip it is. And you can get one from Blinkit or Zepto for like 10-15 rupees, or just any local, grocery store and whatnot. Now, once you have your hands on a tape, cut a strip that's roughly the length of your mouse button, stick it on, and you're done. Seriously, that's all you have to do. If you've never modified your mouse before for clicking, this is where I would recommend starting. Don't overthink it. You don't need a fancy grip tape or expensive accessories to see if track clicking works for you. A simple strip of electrical tape is often enough to make a noticeable difference. There isn't much to optimize with this method either. The only thing I'd suggest is making sure the tape covers the area where your fingers naturally rest while track clicking. As long as you're constantly making contact with the tape, you're good to go. If you want to take it one small step further, grab a permanent marker or a Sharpie. The Sharpie is actually a brand, permanent marker is the general term. Use it and lightly go over the surface of the tape. You don't have to, make a pattern of zigzag or like, cover the entire thing. Just like draw over it, cover most of the surface, and that should be it. It may sound a little strange, but this does help, because the ink slightly, very slightly changes the texture of the tape, and it gives your finger a little more grip. And it's not a night and day difference, but I do find that it makes my track clicking feel a bit more consistent, especially during longer sessions. For this video, I am applying a completely fresh piece of electrical tape to my mouse, so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. At this point, I haven't modified it in any way. No Sharpie, no extra layers, no cleaning with sanitizer, and none of the other tricks that I'm going to talk about later. It's literally just a brand new piece of electrical tape straight out of the roll. Even then, because my fingers already have a decent bit of grip, I can track click on the tape without any issues. So if you're watching this and wondering where to start, do start here. It's quick, it's cheap, and it gives you a solid baseline before you begin experimenting with more advanced modifications. Now that we've covered the first tape method, let's talk about a few ways to get a little more life out of your tape. One thing you'll notice pretty quickly is that electrical tape wears out pretty fast. As you use it, it starts collecting sweat, oils from your fingers, and other debris in the environment. Over time, the surface becomes smoother and your track clicking becomes less consistent. Honestly, if you don't mind spending extra minute or two, the easiest solution is just replacing the tape regularly. I usually recommend replacing before a long session or every couple of days. And electrical tape is cheap, so don't feel like you have to squeeze every last bit of life out of a single strip of that tape. But that said, if you'd rather make your tape last a little bit longer, here are two tricks that have worked plenty well for me. The first one is cleaning the tape with hand sanitizer. Now, I highly recommend using a liquid alcohol based sanitizer instead of a gel based one. For example, those Dettol and Savlon based sanitizers, they are mostly gel based. It's great for keeping your hands clean, great for hand hygiene and whatnot, but it leaves behind ingredients that make the surface feel a lot more smoother, and that isn't something that we want. A simple liquid sanitizer, on the other hand, is mostly just alcohol and water, and it evaporates quickly and it does a much better job of removing the oils and residue that build up on the tape. All I do is spray a tiny amount of sanitizer on a microfiber cloth or directly onto the tape if I'm careful, and gently wipe the surface clean. That's usually enough to restore a surprising amount of grip. And the second trick builds on that. Take a piece of transparent tape that's a little longer than your mouse button, stick it onto the electrical tape. The end, that's proximal to you, should be a little bit longer than the distal end that you're going to peel it off from. So stick it onto your tape, peel it off, stick it back down again, and repeat that a few more times as I've shown in the video. And that's literally all there is to it. What this does is picks up any remaining residue that the hand sanitizer might have missed, and at the same time it leaves behind an extremely small amount of adhesive on the electrical tape, which gives your finger just a little bit of extra grip. It's not a permanent modification, and I'm not going to pretend like it's some revolutionary trick. The effect only lasts for a little while because your fingers naturally remove that adhesive as you keep on playing, and once your hand starts sweating again, the most effects of it disappear. Still, it's quick, it's free if you already have some tape lying around, and it definitely helps. You don't have to have any specific brand. Any cheap transparent tape works, sellotape, whatnot, like anything that you can get your hands on, it works. All right. um, Now personally I use both these methods together. First I'll clean the tape with sanitizer, and then I'll use the transparent tape trick. Neither one completely replaces fresh electrical tape, but together they noticeably extend the lifespan of the strip of electrical tape. And of course, all of this still comes back to the point that we discussed earlier: managing your hands, managing your sweat as good as you can. For example, if I stop playing for a while, my fingers do become dry, and in that case, I'll just rub my fingers to generate a little more heat and moisture. And after a few seconds, I'm back to drag clicking like nothing happened. And on the other hand, if I accidentally touch my face or rub my nose, I can immediately feel the oils from my skin transfer onto my fingers, and they make it a lot more slippery. And in that case, I'll just clean my hands or wash them if they are a bit too slippery. When that happens, I don't try to force it. I just wash my hands and move on with my sessions. It takes less than a minute and it saves a lot of frustration. So if I had to summarize everything we've covered so far, it'll be something like this. Firstly, keep your hands at a comfortable level of moisture. That is something that you'll have to figure out on your own. Once you start drag clicking, do keep a mental note of how your fingers feel, the kind of grip there is. Like, that should give you a good baseline as to how your fingers should be while drag clicking. All right, and based on that, you can modify the tape itself, or just modify the level of sweat and moisture on your fingers. Secondly, use an electrical tape as a baseline modification. Any cheap electrical tape works. As I've already mentioned, I use a steel grip tape, but if you can get a duck brand tape for cheap, do use it. And thirdly, clean the tape regularly with a liquid sanitizer. And finally, use the transparent tape trick whenever you want to restore a little extra grip. Now, of course, none of these tricks even together are gonna make your drag clicking like top tier or anything like that. This is the, I would say, the bare minimum that you can do so that drag clicking becomes a natural habit for you. All right. And of course, yeah, there's this permanent marker trick that I have talked about. A light layer of marker, how it changes the texture, it also helps. Again, none of these tricks are game changing on their own. The electrical tape by itself is doing most of the work. These are just small optimizations that help keep it performing for a little bit longer. So far, everything we've covered is what I'd consider the beginner level setup. For a lot of people, that's already more than enough, if I say so myself. But if you want to take things a step further without spending a fortune or, fancy grip tapes, this is the modification that I would actually recommend. I won't take the credit for the original idea because it is not my original idea whatsoever. I'll leave the video that inspired this down in the description, and I highly recommend you watch that video before continuing this one. The creator explains the basic concept pretty well, and what I'm about to show you is essentially my own version of that setup after experimenting with it for a while. So the first step is to apply a layer of masking tape over your mouse button. The masking tape is great because it sticks well and works on almost any surface, and it peels off cleanly without leaving much residue behind. You don't have to cut it perfectly, but I like trimming mine to match the shape of the mouse button. It doesn't improve performance whatsoever, I just think it looks cleaner. It's totally for the aesthetics. Once the masking tape is on, you should apply your electrical tape over it, just like we did before. Make sure that you cover all the areas where your fingers naturally rest, or at least most of it, so that you can comfortably track click. At this point, the setup is perfectly usable on its own. You're just adding a masking tape below your electrical tape so that you prevent excess residues on your mouse button when you're replacing the tape. Now here comes the part where I changed the things slightly compared to the video that I recommend watching. In the original video, the creator cuts out a piece from a plastic cover of a notebook and places that over the tape. Now, the important thing isn't the notebook or the cover itself, it is the material that it's made of and what we're looking for exactly. If you look closely, those cheap notebook covers have a thin, glossy plastic coating or some sort of compound that has a bit of a plasticky finish. It isn't perfectly smooth, it has tiny ridges and grooves by itself that your finger grips surprisingly well, and that is exactly what we're looking for. The nice thing is that you don't need that exact notebook. Once you understand why it works, you'll start noticing similar materials everywhere. For example, some of those newspapers have a slightly glossy finish that feels very similar. uh, I'm thinking classified as one of those newspapers. Like it used to be like smaller than the regular newspapers, if someone recalls those. But apart from that, a lot of textbooks use coated paper as well. Basically, if the page reflects light and has smooth, almost plastic-like finish, it's probably worth experimenting with. I'll show you what I mean with a picture or video. Uh, and those are the kind of textbooks I'm talking about. That these kinds of pages have those glossy coating or the compound that reflects light whenever you tilt the book. They're not my favorite pages to read because the glare makes them pretty much unreadable. But for our purposes of track clicking, they're actually really useful. Now, before we continue, and if anyone was to accuse me of destroying books and encouraging the process and whatnot, let me assure you that is not what I'm trying to say. Please do not rip out actual pages with proper content on them. Instead, what you can do is, look for those textbooks or, of course, newspapers and pages which have a blank page or an acknowledgement page or, some like quote or something. Like those are effectively completely useless pages without any actual information or useful information over there. All right. And this is something that you probably never use. And that is the exact same thing that I use. In my case, I legitimately just tore out one of the most empty pages from my physiology textbook. It had nothing on it except a small quote, so I wasn't losing any actual content and I wasn't quite destroying, worthwhile content to read. And I've cut that page to size and use it instead of notebook covers from the original tutorial. After that, I went over the surface with a permanent marker, just like we talked about earlier with the marker or the Sharpie trick. And this combination, at least for me, has been the most consistent drag clicking setup that I've found yet. The important takeaway here isn't that you need my specific textbook or that specific notebook that I've linked in the video down below. The real takeaway is understanding the material that you're looking for. So basically, to summarize it, you're looking for something thin, slightly glossy, and just textured enough to create extra grip. Once you understand that, you can improvise with whatever you already have instead of hunting for one specific product. And that's honestly the whole philosophy behind this video, making sure that you have, easy to access products that you can utilize to enhance your grip and just make track clicking a lot more convenient for yourself. Most of us aren't trying to buy, super expensive mice or importing expensive grip tapes from overseas. We're trying to get the best results with the materials that are cheap, easy to find, and already sitting around the house. If you can understand why each modification works instead of blindly copying it, you'll be able to come up with your own improvements as well.
And in the long run, I would say that's much more valuable than following any single tutorial. With this setup, I do notice a small improvement in my CPS. It's nothing ridiculous, and I'm not going to sit here claiming that this suddenly turned me into some track clicking demon. But it's enough to make a difference where I would have to, spam click to make both clutches, or be very mindful of my aim and timing while staircasing or, bridging. I can give myself a lot more leeway just because I'm able to track click at a decent enough level that's, I would say, plenty fine for my purposes. Personally, I can comfortably track click around 15 to 20 CPS over a 5-second test, and in the short bursts that actually matter during a speedrun, usually around 1 to 2 seconds, I'm able to hit like 20 to 25 CPS or even higher. And being completely honest, I think that's more than enough. When you're speedrunning, you're not drag clicking continuously for 10-15 seconds. Most of the time, you're using it in short bursts for like pillaring, staircasing, boat clutches, etc. As long as you can consistently hit around that range, you're in a really good spot. At that point, your mechanics and game sense honestly matter far more than squeezing another 2 to 3 CPS from your clicks. To give you an idea of what this setup looks like in practice, I'll play a few clips after this. These are just normal examples of how I usually track click during the runs. The goal of this video was never to show off, it was to share techniques that generally helped me and hopefully save someone else a lot of trial and error and ease them into drag clicking a lot more conveniently. If you're just getting into drag clicking, please don't obsess over chasing the highest possible CPS. Do focus on consistency first. A clean 15 CPS that you can reliably control is far more useful than occasionally hitting 30 CPS with absolutely no accuracy or consistency. Once your consistency improves bit by bit, the speed, it'll just come naturally. It's like, practicing portals and whatnot. You start off slow, you build a bit of muscle memory, and then it becomes second nature. Drag clicking is honestly like that as well. And that's really the biggest takeaway I'd like you to leave you with. Yeah, that's pretty much everything that I know about drag clicking. I hope I haven't missed anything. Yeah. And if you have any questions, do feel free to leave them in the comments or reach out to me via Discord. I'll leave my ID down in the description. I do want to set an exception though. I'll do my best to reply whenever I can, but I cannot promise that the replies will be quick. The idea for this video has been sitting around for well over a month at this point, and recording it only took a few hours, but actually finding the time to sit down and make the video and then edit it was the hardest part, honestly. I'm currently a medical intern, a doctor by profession, to make it simple. So my schedule is pretty unpredictable. Some days I barely get enough free time to play Minecraft. If I do take a little while to get back to you, I'm not ignoring your message. I'm probably just stuck at the hospital or too tired to do even basic chores. That said, if you have a genuine question about something I covered in this video, I'll absolutely try my best to help. I'd also like to encourage you to join the Indian MCSR Discord community if you're from the community or in the country, of course. I'll leave an invite in the description as well. At the time I'm recording this video, we're sitting at just under 200 members, and I'd generally love to see the community grow. It's a really welcoming place, whether you're completely new to speedrunning or you've been grinding runs for years. I'm not the most active person per se, I'm mostly a lurker. I'll react to messages, occasionally join conversations, and answer questions when I can. But I'm not uh, super active, as I've already said, but I'm definitely around. Finally, just remember what this video was meant to be. This isn't the definitive guide to drag clicking or drag clicking 101 for budget ballers and whatnot. I'm certainly not the best person in the world at it, of course. Everything I've shared here is either something I've personally tested or something I've learned from other players and forums and such online. There are definitely players out there who know far more than I do. Dougal, of course, like the best source I would say to go out and to reach out to and learn a thing or two about track clicking. And if I come across better techniques and tips in the future, I'd encourage you to learn from, you know, uh, those things as well. Hopefully, I'll link them down in the description if I do find them. Um, and once again, the goal of this video was to simply make drag clicking more accessible, especially if you're on a budget.
Not everyone can afford premium mice, import grip tapes, and expensive aftermarket accessories. A lot of us are working with whatever we already have. Hopefully, this video shows that you can still get really solid results without spending a fortune. If this helps you out, then I've accomplished exactly what I wanted. So, thank you for watching. Enjoy your speedruns, and hopefully, I'll see some of you around in the Indian MCSR community. Goodbye and take care.